May 10th, 1973, an insignificant date to most, but if you're a die-hard Knicks fan, it's probably a date that stands out to you. That was the last time the New York Knicks won an NBA championship after they defeated the LA Lakers in 5 games in the finals, taking home their second title in 4 years. At that time, the NBA only consisted of 17 teams, and this was prior to the NBA-ABA merger. Over 50 years since the biggest market in the league has been able to hoist the Larry O'Brien trophy over their heads and hang a banner in the rafters. 90% of you watching weren't even born the last time the Knicks won a championship, and even fewer would have a memory of this ever happening. And through the years, the Knicks have made pushes to get back to the promised land with a strong team in the 90s that unfortunately just ran into Michael Jordan countless times in the playoffs. And by the time Jordan retired, the Knicks, led by Patrick Ewing, were a little too old to get over the hump to secure a ring. They were able to get their superstar in Karl Anthony in 2011, the biggest name in their franchise since Patrick Ewing, but that never got them past the second round of the playoffs. But outside of a handful of good years, in that 50-year span, the Knicks have more or less been the laughingstock of the NBA, losing season after season, failed lottery picks, multiple head coaches, multiple different roster iterations, questionable trades, poor free agency signings, and it became a common meme to clown the Knicks and their franchise's incompetence. But the Knicks, after so many years of irrelevancy, have finally turned things around and put together a roster that is formidable, a formidable force in the Eastern Conference and a legitimate title contender. Arguably the first time since the 90s where you can confidently say that this team has a shot at the title. But while the Knicks have positioned themselves well to truly compete for a championship, they're walking a fine line between ensuring success or failure that could set their franchise back for years yet again. What do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about it. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, be sure to subscribe to help the channel grow, and in return, I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, of course, we've had some time to process the more recent Karl Anthony Towns trade, the implications of what it means for the Knicks, the Timberwolves, and the future outlook of both teams. But with the Knicks, this wasn't just an isolated move at landing a big name in the association. No, they have been building towards this over a host of transactions since 2021. I'm sure some of you all have seen by now that graphic of the 2020-21 Knicks team and how only one player still remains with the team today from that roster in 2021, that being Mitchell Robinson. Every other player has either been traded, walked in free agency, or has been waived. Now, of course, the biggest acquisition that kicked off this current roster iteration was the signing of Jalen Brunson in the summer of 2022, where the Knicks moved a lot of pieces on their roster to be able to open up the cap space to land Brunson and signed him to a 4-year, $104 million contract, which a lot of people at that time, while they thought Brunson was a fine player, paying him that kind of money for an undersized guard as your franchise's savior was a big stretch. But it ultimately ended up being one of the best signings in their franchise history, as Brunson would outplay that contract, become the team's best player, and ultimately become an all-star. The Knicks would go from being a lottery team in 2022 to a playoff team the following season and winning their first playoff series in over a decade. And the front office knew, hey, they had something here. They had an opportunity to take this team to the next level and finally become title contenders again, bringing their franchise back to relevancy. And thus, the Knicks would make very aggressive moves since the summer of 2023 by moving on from their young talent and trading for more established players, trading for OG Anunoby, letting guys like RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Quentin Grimes go, acquiring Josh Hart in a trade, signing Dante DiVincenzo as a free agent, and then, of course, the most aggressive move to date, trading for Mikal Bridges for a plethora of picks, 5 picks in total to really round out the roster going into the 24-25 season. And now, of course, the most recent trade of landing Karl Anthony Towns and moving on from Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, and a first-round pick, as well as some second-round picks to the Hornets in the deal. This is now quite possibly the most complete Knicks team we have seen in over 50 years. Star power combined with versatility on offense and defense, a legitimate threat to the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference. The Knicks face one big problem, though. With all the moves they made in just the past year, they've now put themselves in a position where they have to make this work in a small window to do so before they enter a position of being in salary cap hell and asset poor when it comes to their draft capital. Now, obviously, the biggest reason for the Timberwolves trading their once franchise player in Karl Anthony Towns was for financial reasons under the league's new CBA. The Timberwolves knew their long-term payroll was going to put them in a bind financially of being in that dreaded second apron, with Anthony Edwards' new Supermax deal kicking in this season, Jaden McDaniels' new $130 million contract going into effect this season as well, Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid both being due for contract extension soon. Cat's long-term Supermax contract was going to put them in a financial bind and severely limit what they could do in the future. But with the Knicks now acquiring that contract that still has 4 years, $220 million guaranteed on their books, they now find themselves in a similar situation as the Timberwolves once were. But in fact, it's actually worse. The Knicks going into this season have a projected payroll of $179.7 million owed to their players, a figure that puts them into the luxury tax and just over the first apron, which is set at $178.7 million. Not terrible when you consider the fact that there are teams around the league with higher payrolls who are in a worse position than the Knicks. See teams like the Lakers, Warriors, Bucks, even the Suns. But where things really start getting dicey for the Knicks is the following season and beyond that, where they are projected to be a perpetual second apron team with all the salary committed on their books, with the new extension deal for Brunson kicking in the 25-26 season, as well as the incremental raises for OG Anunoby and Karl Anthony Towns. But in addition to that, the looming extension for Mikal Bridges, who will be on an expiring contract in the 25-26 season and will be looking for a hefty payday for a strong two-way player in his prime. In the 25-26 season, as things currently stand, the Knicks have $192 million committed on their books, a figure that already puts them over the second apron, even factoring in raises to the league's salary cap and luxury tax threshold. A large extension for Bridges on even a near-max deal would firmly cement them in the second apron for the foreseeable future, with the long-term agreements of Cat, OG, and Jalen Brunson, who are under contract through 2029. Remember when Brunson signed that early contract extension at the beginning of the summer, leaving millions of dollars on the table, taking a lesser deal had he just waited until the following offseason to sign a max contract? A move a lot of people saw as making a sacrifice for the good of the team and putting them in an even better position to win. But in reality, he was positioning himself to get an even bigger payday by agreeing to an extension at his 10-year of service mark in the NBA in the 27-28 season, where he could sign a massive near $400 million contract with the projected salary cap figures at that time. The same time where OG and Cat will be making $45 million and $61 million respectively. Oh, and by the way, will also be due for extension themselves. All players on max or near max deals, but at the time will be in their early 30s. Now, what's the downside of being a second apron team, particularly a second apron team for multiple seasons? And I'm sure some of you already know this, but for those that don't, it severely limits your ability to make moves on the margins in improving your roster. One, you're not able to aggregate contracts in a trade, so you can't send out multiple players in a deal if it's not a 1-for-1 or 2-for-2 type trade. You're not able to send out cash in trades, and you're not able to take back more money than you're sending out in a deal. It has to be equal or lesser amount in any trade package. You're also not able to sign players on the buyout market, and probably the biggest impact in all of this is that you're not able to trade your pick 7 years out. So in this instance, going into this current season, you wouldn't be able to trade your pick in 2032, which is important despite it being so far out in the future, because future first-round picks are valuable assets that contending teams can dangle as sweeteners to land win-now type players. And with the Stephian rule in the NBA, which doesn't allow for teams to trade consecutive first-round picks, if you've traded, say, in this example, your pick in 2030, you're not going to be able to trade your pick in 2031, since it's back-to-back years, and of course your pick in 2032, since it's frozen as a second apron team. Now look, here's the situation with the Knicks, because being a second apron team isn't all that bad if you're truly competing for a title and you're able to be a contender for multiple seasons. And while I think most will agree that the Knicks have arguably one of the best starting fives in the NBA, if not the best in the league, with Brunson, Bridges, OG, Cat, and Mitchell Robinson, a very well-balanced, well-rounded starting lineup where the players' skills complement each other, what they lack hugely is depth. Josh Hart is going to be their sixth man, and he's solid, Tom Thibodeau's favorite, but outside of that, not much going, both on offense and defense. And yes, we know Tibbs likes to keep his rotation short anyway, to a fault where guys play too many minutes over the course of a season and end up getting injured. Case in point, last season during the playoffs, where guys just straight up ran out of gas when Hart was playing all 48 minutes for consecutive games. But you can't play a six-man rotation over the course of an 82-game season and not expect to see some kind of drop-off or injuries. And normally, this wouldn't be a problem because you could say, well, they still have some room to add some depth off the bench by way of trades. Not really. Not under the new CBA and the Knicks being an apron team. But also, they don't have the trade assets they used to, given most of their trade chips that they'd used to acquire the guys on their team were made this summer. Mitchell Robinson is probably the most valuable trade asset at this point, or at least a player that would be on the trading block, as they're not going to trade any of their other starters, nor are they going to move on from Josh Hart. And you're not going to be able to get an insane haul for someone like Robinson when he's coming off a pretty big injury. And even then, keep in mind the restraints they face in trying to trade players under the new apron rules. Look, the Knicks on paper are going to be great. No one is saying they aren't. But one major injury to one of their core players is a much bigger loss when you have little to no depth on your roster. And given the history of some of these players and the history of rosters coached by Tom Thibodeau, love the guy, but it's true, you're putting yourself in a position where there is little margin for error for this team to be successful in actually winning a championship. The guys have to stay healthy, which is a tall order, especially for a player like OG Anunoby and his injury history. Mikal Bridges has always been healthy and playing in basically every game that has been available to him in his career, but will that continue to last? Cat has had his issues with injuries, same with Mitchell Robinson, and unlike before, the Knicks are no longer flushed with draft capital to give them some outs or a contingency plan should this thing not work out. This has to work for the Knicks. They have gone all in on this roster to try and win their first title in 52 years. Can it be done? I personally have my doubts, especially with a strong team like the Boston Celtics, but I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.